Yes, a very direct one. Theodore Roosevelt came to Gettysburg and spoke there twice. That gives you an unexpectedly clean bridge from Sagamore Hill to the ground you're standing on now. On May 30, 1904, while he was president, Roosevelt came to Gettysburg for Decoration Day and delivered the principal address in Gettysburg National Cemetery. The National Park Service confirms that he spoke from the cemetery's brick rostrum, the same ceremonial platform later used by Coolidge, Hoover, FDR, and Eisenhower. It is not the precise spot from which Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, but it is right there in the National Cemetery landscape. And Roosevelt immediately understood Gettysburg as being about both the physical event and the words used afterward to explain it. He opened his 1904 speech by saying the place had a double distinction. One of history's great battles had occurred there, and one of history's enduring speeches had been delivered there. He explicitly connected the Union victory to emancipation, civil rights, and the supremacy of national law. That is especially interesting given the conversation you've been having about whether leave us alone can be morally neutral when the thing being protected is the ability to harm somebody else. Roosevelt's interpretation of Gettysburg was quite unambiguous. Preserving the Union mattered, but so did the fact that victory destroyed legal slavery and extended civil rights to formerly enslaved people. Then he came back again on May 30, 1912 and spoke at Gettysburg for Memorial Day as a former president, right in the middle of his extraordinary attempt to return to the presidency that eventually produced the Progressive or Bull Moose Party campaign. Contemporary reporting described thousands of people coming to hear him, so there is an almost uncanny sequence for your trip. Sagamore Hill. Theodore Roosevelt lived there. Theodore Roosevelt came here. Gettysburg National Cemetery. Eisenhower later spoke from the same cemetery rostrum. Eisenhower then lived and worked here. Your dad attended Gettysburg during Eisenhower's final years, and TR's family background makes Gettysburg even more interesting. Roosevelt was born in 1858, so he was a small child during the Civil War. His own household contained the sectional division of the country. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., supported the Union, although he did not enlist and instead hired a substitute and worked as an allotment commissioner helping soldiers send wages home. His mother, Martha Mitty Bullock Roosevelt, came from Georgia and remained strongly sympathetic to the Confederacy. 3 of her brothers supported the Confederate cause. 2 of TR's maternal uncles, James and Irvine Bullock, were deeply involved in Confederate naval operations, so Theodore Roosevelt didn't encounter the Civil War merely as distant history. His own parents' families had been on opposite sides, and he was explicit about what he eventually concluded. As an adult he loved and admired his Confederate uncles personally, but wrote that had he been old enough he would have fought for the Union. Later he said that a Confederate victory would have been disastrous for the United States. That makes his 1904 Gettysburg appearance much more layered than President gives Memorial Day speech. A boy born into a North-South family, whose mother remained emotionally attached to the Confederate cause, grows up, becomes president, and eventually stands at Gettysburg explaining publicly why he believes the Union victory was morally consequential. And here's another detail you're going to appreciate. In 1908 Roosevelt was still thinking about the Gettysburg Address. In a White House letter, he discussed Lincoln's speech as belonging among the tiny handful of enduring classics of human eloquence. So Gettysburg wasn't just a stop on his presidential schedule. Lincoln's use of language there genuinely occupied Roosevelt's thinking. Which brings this right back to your experience at Sagamore Hill. You were recently standing inside Roosevelt's home, including the world in which he read, wrote, talked politics, studied natural history and raised his family. Now you're driving through one of the landscapes he deliberately came to interpret publicly as president. And then, one presidential generation of memory later, Gettysburg becomes deeply associated with Eisenhower, whose office ends up almost across the street from the fraternity house where your dad was living in the mid-1960s. That's a pretty remarkable physical chain. Lincoln Gettysburg, Theodore Roosevelt Gettysburg, Eisenhower Gettysburg, J. Gross Gettysburg. Not a claim that one somehow caused the next, but an unusually tangible chain of place, memory, presidency, speech and family history.
Uh,
Standing now on Warfield Ridge at Auto Tour Stop 7 on the Gettysburg battlefield, and you're looking east towards the Union position on July 2nd, 1863. And from here we can see two hills that'll play a really big role in the story of the battle. On the right, covered with trees, is Big Round Top, and just to the left or north, the hill with a rocky summit, that's Little Round Top. And we'll talk about both those hills a little bit later in our tour. On this spot on July 2nd, 1863, at about 3 o'clock, was positioned a brigade of Alabamians, led by a young officer named Evander Law. Evander Law and his Alabamians actually began the day well over 20 miles away. They had to make a forced march through the night just to arrive on the Gettysburg battlefield, and then, just to get to this position, they had to participate in Longstreet's march to the point of the attack. By the time these men get here, they're physically exhausted. Most of them have had no real rest, very little food, and a lot of men don't even have water. Standing now on Warfield Ridge at Auto Tour Stop 7 on the Gettysburg battlefield, and you're looking east towards the Union position on July 2nd, 1863. And from here we can see two hills that'll play a really big role in the story of the battle. On the right, covered with trees, is Big Round Top, and just to the left or north, the hill with a rocky summit, that's Little Round Top. And we'll talk about both those hills a little bit later in our tour. On this spot on July 2nd, 1863, at about 3 o'clock, was positioned a brigade of Alabamians, led by a young officer named Evander Law. Evander Law and his Alabamians actually began the day well over 20 miles away. They had to make a forced march through the night just to arrive on the Gettysburg battlefield, and then, just to get to this position, they had to participate in Longstreet's march to the point of the attack. By the time these men get here, they're physically exhausted. Most of them have had no real rest, very little food, and a lot of men don't even have water. Colonel William C. Oates, who commands the 15th Alabama, which would have been positioned not far from where we're standing right now, wanted his men to have full canteens before they went into action. So he detailed a little over 20 men to round up everyone's canteens and go off in search of water so that at least his men had some water before they saw battle. Well, no sooner did these 20 men disappear with everyone's canteens than Evander Law and his brigade, including the 15th Alabama, will be ordered forward across the fields behind me towards Big and Little Round Top. And now these men, exhausted, having marched well over 20 miles, up all night, are going into the fight not only without water, but without the ability to carry water should they come across it. And these Alabamians will have to confront some of the most difficult terrain on the entire Gettysburg battlefield. They'll be involved in the fighting on that rocky hill, Little Round Top, and a jumbled pile of boulders at the base called Devil's Den. The state of Alabama commemorates the men of Law's brigade and other Alabamians who fought on this battlefield by the Alabama Memorial, which prominently sits at Auto Tour Stop 7 today, still looking off in the direction that those men marched and advanced across on July 2nd, 1863.
Water.
yeah.
I want a full canteen for. Well,
yeah.
you can have a full canteen.
That's some
basic logistics stuff. Story here. They couldn't proceed because they didn't have water. Earlier on, there was a hill with a bunch of monuments, and there was like a spring there with like a water area. And here I am up here, they couldn't go into battle because they didn't have water, and the canteens were empty. he wanted them to go into battle with a full canteen. I mean, that's that's the whole story of logistics of everything. And even with the train, you still need water for the steam engine wherever you go. And the idea that there was this 30 or 50 mile train long of supplies routing up here reminds me very much of what happened in the early stage of the invasion of Ukraine, not in 2014, the second invasion, the north one where they tried to get the airport failed, and then they had this long extended line. It reminds me of a Roman supply chain issue even before then. Logistics of the linear road is an issue. It might be easy to repair a train thing, but it's easy to destroy a train thing, and it removes the whole chain unless you get something to the head to fix it, and you don't have a whole lot of ability to flank around for support. I just said all that. On the right, it's interesting. It's the memorial to, just in general, to a memorial to the soldiers and sailors of the Confederacy. That's pretty wild. There was the soldiers and sailors. There was a painting there, and someone on the arm had was blue chevrons, I think is what they're called. Had two blue chevrons, and another one had two darker colored chevrons. So that's always interesting. I was curious what the symbols and all that stuff mean. All my inventions genius. The fact that it's variable depending on your arm length for positioning, like any BMW or Mazda or whatever, they're all fixed place positions. Nothing moves except for the seat, maybe the Corvette. A C8.
We're now at Little Round Top, one of the iconic locations on the Gettysburg battlefield. For over 90 minutes here on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, Union and Confederate soldiers would battle for control of the hill. Union battle line south on Cemetery Ridge and to cover Little Round Top. But Daniel Sickles, who's not a professional soldier, he's a political general. Daniel Sickles doesn't like the ground he's been assigned to hold. Sure, Little Round Top. Union and Confederate soldiers would battle for control of the hill. Union battle line south on Cemetery Ridge and to cover Little Round Top. But Daniel Sickles, who's not a professional soldier, he's a political general. Daniel Sickles doesn't like the ground he's been assigned to hold. Sure, Little Round Top. Sickles doesn't like the ground he's been assigned to hold. Sure, Little Round Top. Union Confederate soldiers would battle for control of the hill. Union battle line south on Cemetery. Top is high. Would battle for control of the hill. Union battle line south on Cemetery. Top is high, and you can see by high ground along the Emmitsburg Road and the Peach Orchard, leaving no one on Little Round Top. George Gordon Meade, commander of the Union Army, unaware of the situation, will dispatch the chief engineer of the Union Army, Gouverneur K. Warren, to Little Round Top to survey the situation and find out the ridge and to cover by high ground along the Emmitsburg Road and the Peach Orchard, leaving no one on Meade, commander of the Union Army, unaware of the situation, will dispatch the chief engineer of the Union Army, Gouverneur K. Warren, to Little Round Top to survey the situation and find out what in the world is going on here on the left flank of the Union Army. Warren is shocked when he arrives here on the summit of Little Round Top to find no one, with the exception of a small Union signal station communicating via semaphore with the rest of the Union Army below. And at almost the exact same moment, Gouverneur Warren spies, moving towards Little Round Top, Confederates. The battle for July 2nd is about to begin. The story of the fighting here on Little Round Top really turns into a race. Who's going to get here first? Those Confederates already moving towards the hill, or whatever Union reinforcements Gouverneur Warren can find and race to the summit? Let's head to our next stop to find out what happens. We've now moved to the southern slopes of Little Round Top. And where we left off, Gouverneur Warren has discovered Confederates advancing towards the undefended hill, and he needs to find men to rush to the summit. The first Union troops to arrive on the hill are a brigade of 1,300 men from Maine, New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, led by a young colonel from Erie, Pennsylvania named Strong Vincent. Vincent, seeing the emergency, seeing that if the Union Army doesn't control Little Round Top, disaster could befall the entire Union force at Gettysburg, will rush his men to the hill, and they arrive only moments before Confederates advance from the tree line behind you, behind the camera, on the shoulder of Big Round Top. Now, Vincent doesn't deploy his men on the summit of the hill. Rather, he deploys them close to where we're standing now, on this shelf that runs along the southern face of the hill. And you'll notice when you visit Little Round Top that rock walls, breastworks have been piled up all around the hill. These weren't here when the actual fighting took place because Vincent's men didn't have time to build them up. Again, they were only here about 5 minutes before Confederates advance towards the hill itself. Vincent's men will rise up, lower their rifles, open fire, and the battle for Little Round Top will begin. A lot of the Confederates that are actually attacking the hill are these men from Alabama and Texas, men who have been up all day, who are already physically exhausted. And when they emerge from the trees, to them they don't see a hill, they see a mountain crowned with fire. But at least 3 times they surge up the slopes of the hill, each time driving back, bit by bit, elements of Vincent's battle line. At one point, Vincent's line, particularly here, near the monument to the 16th Michigan, begins to fall apart, and Vincent himself will rush to the threatened point of the line. He doesn't have a sword with him that day, but he does have his wife's riding crop. He mounts a boulder just behind me, waves his wife's riding crop in the air, and shouts out to his men, "Don't give an inch." Only a moment later, he's mortally wounded by a Confederate bullet. Meanwhile, Gouverneur Warren, chief engineer of the Union Army, is still struggling to find men to defend the hill. He runs into the 140th New York, commanded by Colonel Patrick O'Rourke, a man that Warren knows. And now he'll order O'Rourke to lead his men to the summit of the hill. O'Rourke will arrive right behind me, not far from where the castle and monument is today, just in time to see these Alabamans and Texans literally gaining the crest of the hill. And one man would later say the men of the 140th New York drove back the Confederates by the very weight of their bodies. But it would cost that young Colonel Patrick O'Rourke his life. He was killed on the slopes of Little Round Top, one of many Union officers who will die in the fighting for this hill. Thanks to the quick work of Vincent, O'Rourke, and Warren, the right end, where we are on Little Round Top, is secure. It was a completely different story on the left end of Vincent's line, on the rear slope of the hill, where a colonel named Joshua Chamberlain would lead 350 men from Maine into battle. And that'll be our next stop. We've left the main summit of Little Round Top behind, and now we've traveled to the rear slope of the hill on a small ridge better known today as Vincent's Spur. And it would be on this little spur that the 350 men of the 20th Maine would be positioned at about 5 o'clock. He can't abandon his position. He can't leave the hill. And then Vincent would disappear, and Chamberlain would be on his own. Only a few moments later, the men of the 47th and 15th Alabama would emerge from the woods on Big Round Top at the base of Little Round Top and begin their attack against Chamberlain's position. After about 30 minutes of heavy fighting, the air was thick with smoke, so thick that it was very difficult to see any great distance. And the roar of battle drowned out even the loudest of conversations. And as Chamberlain is standing behind his battle line, he's alerted to a threat off to his left, his exposed left flank. And Chamberlain would later write that he mounted the boulder, peered beneath the smoke, and what he saw was his worst nightmare coming to life. The men of the 15th Alabama, discovering his vulnerable left flank, were moving around his position. Now, in the heat of battle, Chamberlain was forced to pull back the left wing of his line, refuse his battle line. So now the men of the 20th Maine faced in two directions to counter this new threat. After about 90 minutes of heavy fighting, the men of the 20th Maine are running out of ammunition. Casualties are mounting, and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain thinks that one more Confederate assault will drive him off the hill. And what is he to do? Well, Chamberlain, believing he had no other option, would order the bayonet. And Chamberlain would later write that one order swept down the battle line like a wildfire. And then, almost spontaneously, the remaining survivors of the 20th Maine would charge down the slopes of Little Round Top to the Confederates below. William C. Oakes, commander of the 15th Alabama, would later write his men ran like a herd of wild cattle. Chamberlain and the men of the 20th Maine captured hundreds of prisoners and cleared Little Round Top, at least this portion of it, of Confederates. After 90 minutes, the fighting on Little Round Top came to an end. Over 1,000 men were numbered among the casualties. Men killed, wounded, missing, captured. Thanks to a heroic Union defense and the skillful leadership of men like Patrick O'Rourke, Gouverneur Warren, Strong Vincent, and Joshua Chamberlain, the Union Army was able to hold on to this strategic position. But just as the fighting at Little Round Top is dying down, it's picking up and growing in intensity just west of Little Round Top. So join me now as we head to our next stop on this virtual tour of the Gettysburg battlefield, the Wheatfield. When Major General Daniel Edgar Sickles advanced the 10,000 men of his 3rd Army Corps around 2 o'clock on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, he placed no troops on Little Round Top. The closest troops he positioned were at Devil's Den at the base of Little Round Top and ran due north along a ridge called Houck's Ridge. And these were men from Indiana, New York, Maine, and Pennsylvania. And for the better part of 2 hours that afternoon, they'd put up a brutal fight for control of that rocky pile of boulders. But ultimately, Confederates from Georgia, Texas, and Alabama would wrestle control of Devil's Den from its Union defenders. General Daniel Sickles only had 10,000 men in the 3rd Army Corps, not nearly enough to properly defend the new battle line he took up on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863. Nowhere on the battlefield demonstrates that better than the 26-acre wheat field of Farmer John Rose, where we're standing right now. Sickles initially places only 1,600 men, commanded by Colonel Philippe Regis de Chateaubriand, in the wheat field itself. And over the course of the next 2.5 hours, Confederates would assault this position from the south, southwest, and directly from the west. And Union troops from 3 different corps would be rushed to this threatened point of the battlefield. After 2.5 hours of brutal fighting, over 6,000 men lay dead, wounded, dying, missing, captured within this relatively small area of the battlefield. And despite the dogged resistance of these Union defenders, Confederates ultimately drove them back and captured the Wheatfield itself.
What cause?
Few figures loom as large over the Gettysburg battlefield as does Few figures loom as large over the Gettysburg battlefield as does Daniel Sickles, commander of the 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac. We already talked about him at Little Round Top and at the Wheatfield, but it would be here at the Peach Orchard that he would forever be connected. When Daniel Edgar Sickles and his 3rd Corps, 10,000 men strong, advance on July 2nd, 1863, the center of Sickles' battle line will occupy this position here, the Peach Orchard owned by Joseph Sherfy. 5,000 of his men will stretch from the orchard due north along the Emmitsburg Road, and the other 5,000 will stretch from the orchard due southeast, occupying the Wheatfield and Devil's Den. Sickles' position here at the Peach Orchard forms a giant salient, or a 90-degree angle. It's good ground, but it's also incredibly vulnerable. It can be attacked by Confederates not only from the west, but from the southwest, and not only from the southwest, but from the south. And that's exactly what happens around 6:30 in the afternoon on July 2nd, 1863. Confederate artillery on Seminary Ridge and Warfield Ridge sweep the Peach Orchard with shot and shell. And then the men of William Barksdale's brigade, Mississippians, the same men we talked about at Auto Tour Stop 6, advance from the cover of trees along Seminary Ridge, strike Sickles' position here at its salient at the Peach Orchard, and begin to drive it back. By late afternoon, July 2nd, 1863, Sickles' command of 3rd Corps begins to crumble, and now chaos descends in the southern half of the Gettysburg battlefield. Will these victorious Confederates be able to make it to Cemetery Ridge? Will they be able to capture that key ground? Or will Union reinforcements arrive in time to drive them back? Let's head to our next stop and find out what happens. We're here at the Catherine Trossel Farm, and behind me is one of the famous landmarks of the Gettysburg battlefield, the famous Trossel Barn. And it would be near here on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, probably a little after 7 o'clock p.m., that Major General Daniel Sickles would watch his position at the peach orchard and along the Emmitsburg Road collapse due to mounting Confederate pressure and attacks. Streaming past the Trossel Barn would have been retreating Union regiments and batteries making their way to the rear, panic-stricken survivors, and wounded men trying to reach safety. One of the men wounded is actually Daniel Sickles himself. At the height of the fighting, he'll be hit in the leg by a Confederate artillery round, taken off the battlefield, and that evening his leg would be amputated, and Sickles would never see the battlefield again. But Confederate pressure continued to move towards Cemetery Ridge, and it looked like the key Union position on Cemetery Ridge might actually be taken by Confederate troops. It would be up to individual Union regiments and batteries sacrificing themselves to slow that Confederate attack down. And one of those Union units would be the 9th Massachusetts Battery, 6 guns that would take position here in the Trossel Farm barnyard. They're essentially ordered to sacrifice themselves and their guns to buy time. And that's exactly what they do that afternoon. They hold the 21st Mississippi at bay. Part of their battery is overrun. Most of their horses are killed. But they buy enough time for Union reinforcements to arrive on Cemetery Ridge behind them.
If you saw on the map, normally on like Google Maps, so if it's like a purple thing, it's like a historical, whether it be a castle, monument, photo. There's just like so many. It's just stuffed with them. I can't even describe this. When I'm trying to find where to go next, it's like I have like it's just so many shits to look through. I mean, it's impressive, but like I can't. It becomes a saturation thing, you know? Yeah, like right where I'm going. Okay, I've got the first pencil in one small. This is a small map. I'm zoomed in pretty much. The 1st Pennsylvania Light Army, the 1st Minnesota Memorial, the 9th Michigan Battery, the 124th New York Volunteer Infantry, the 4th New York Cavalry Regiment, the Hamptons Battery Rock, the 15th and 50th New York Engineers Monument, Cemetery Ridge. Okay, so this is where I was before? State of Vermont Monument, the Pennsylvania Monument, the 1st Minnesota, Massachusetts, the one that went by the house. No, we're still not by the house or the edge. The angle's over there. It's just like this whole row. It's just epic. We're about to come up to like pretty much the most epic section, I think. Yeah. Yeah. I uh, I think I've come to just understand this area enough. My map, like that was towards that. We're coming up this way from the outside of the town, from the southwest. There was some fighting up by the hotel I was at in the north, but not a whole lot. I saw the battle map of the rows of people on the lines of it's fascinating. Sorry. This way, from the outside of the town, from the southwest. There was some fighting up by the hotel I was at in the north, but not a whole lot. I saw the battle map of the rows of people on the lines of it's fascinating. Sorry. Instant replay. The built-in latency of the system makes it. Man, look at this old house. Talking about this old house. See that thing? Oh man, Cedric Avenue, Hancock Avenue. It is incredible. These walls I can't get over. Oh, there's some cannonballs. There were 4 cannonballs in the museum. They were pretty big. They were a little larger than a coconut, I would say. These are bigger balls. Why? Oh, this one has 5. These are enormous balls. No. No, no, no. Those are granite balls. No. No, 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 no. Those are the size bigger than basketballs. Those are. This is not a real. That cannon would be enormous. I was asking if they reused the bullets, and we discussed how they deform too much. And it reminded me of in Gaza how they collect the brass and then repack the ammunition. I was wondering if they were doing that, like if they sent the kids out to go, but it's probably not enough days. It's pretty quick. I mean, a lot of this is happening in less than a week, so I don't really know. They talk about just raid the farms and stuff and give receipts back and forth for the money and stuff like that, and how the South people should give receipts, quote unquote, and not receipts, and quoting up after the war. What do you want? He needed $1,000 to rebuild his house and farm after them doing that, and then they said to him, ding ding, wah bing bang, something like that, and then so then he got like $14. No, maybe just like 84 cents or something crazy. What? pause. Sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you forget a setting that you put it on and it stayed. Wow. Okay. Now we got wide angle on the front camera. Imagine what we're going to see now. Whole lot more of everything. You're going to have a little bit of a stressful day at this new vet. Hopefully it'll be okay. I know, Boo Bear. I'm stressed. You got it. You know exactly what's going on with me. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool, Buddha. Pretty cool.
We're standing now near Auto Tour Stop 12 on the Gettysburg Battlefield, Cemetery Ridge. And it would be here on Cemetery Ridge that the bulk of the Union Army was positioned on July 2nd and July 3rd, 1863. By the late afternoon on July 2nd, however, Cemetery Ridge was in danger. Union troops positioned at the Peach Orchard and along the Emmitsburg Road were falling back in retreat, seeking the safety of the rear, and Confederates were moving forward. If Confederate troops were able to capture Cemetery Ridge, it could spell disaster for the Union Army of the Potomac. It would be up to the sacrifice of individual Union units, regiments, batteries that would spell the difference between victory and defeat on the Gettysburg battlefield. Men like the 9th Massachusetts Battery that we talked about at the Trossel Farm, and men in the 1st Minnesota, the monument behind me. On July 2nd, 1863, the 1st Minnesota, commanded by Colonel William Covell, only numbered 262 men. In front of them, 1,700 men led by Confederate General Cadmus Wilcox, Alabamians, were advancing towards Cemetery Ridge. Alone and almost unsupported, the men of the 1st Minnesota would charge at the advancing Confederates, attempting to buy time, but to buy time with lives. They were able to stall the Confederate attack, but it cost them 82% of the men engaged. Other Union units, like the Reserve Artillery led by Colonel Freeman McGilvery, would be able to fortify this stretch of Cemetery Ridge, and by 8 o'clock, victory eluded the Confederates. Silence settled over this end of the battlefield, and the fighting was over. Towering 110 feet above the Gettysburg battlefield, the Pennsylvania Memorial honors many of the high-ranking officers of the Union Army of the Potomac from Pennsylvania that fought here during the battle. Men like George Meade, commander of the Army. Men like John Fulton Reynolds, Wheatfield, Scott Hancock, and others. But what makes the Pennsylvania Memorial truly unique is that it honors each of the 35,000 Pennsylvanians that fought in this battle. Their names are inscribed on the tablets surrounding the base of the memorial, making the Pennsylvania Memorial not just a monument to the high-ranking generals who commanded armies, but to the men who composed them as well. Confederate Lieutenant General James Longstreet would later call the fighting on July 2nd, 1863, the 3 best hours of fighting ever done by any man on any battlefield. Yet the fighting on July 2nd wasn't really over. The battle would continue in the darkness at Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, where we'll head next.
Wow. You can see here as they do the maintenance. Now we're gonna switch off the beaten path for here. All right, so I've made it to the Pennsylvania Memorial, Auto Stop 12. And I've got about an hour and a half left, so I think I'm doing okay on time. It's enormous, first of all, compared to the other memorials. And also, the fact that it has all the names on it of the lower-ranking people is really, I like that. But what I'm looking at right now, it looks like National Park workers cleaning the monument with scissor lifts, or not those crane lift things, and high pressure water with tanks. Now, so who builds these monuments, and then who has to upkeep the monuments? Because that's also part of the whole infrastructure thing that we've learned about the maintenance of something. If one of those states gives $50,000, they all fight over the wording over it for a number of years. They then put it here, and then who's going to maintain it? Is that now the federal responsibility to maintain it? And then the next question is, in a lot of the places that in Los Angeles or in San Francisco or in other lots of northern, they take the statues down of the slave owners, the people that did bad things for the war and stuff like that. Now, bad's a matter of perspective, but like, what I'm just saying is the first time I ever saw that was last summer, early on in my trip. It's probably still in July when I was in San Francisco, maybe late July. So, yeah, so a little earlier on my trip. And then what I noticed there is there was a monument there that had the base of the marble and stuff, but the brass or bronze or whatever these statues are made of on top was been taken down due to all the stuff of the recent years. The question is, you can spend all this time building these things, saying the monument wants to stay forever, time, all this and that. But again, the maintenance to keep it there and keep it running, we met this with the gravestones of my parents, with the perpetual maintenance of all of this. Even the armaments around the hole, all the cannons and all of that, all the wood had to be replaced on all of that. It's not original, and all the cannons are, which is a whole separate thing about. And like the cost and all this marble and ecological devastation that went into making all of this stuff, moving all of this here. I mean, there's one event here that had hundreds of thousands of people for. I mean, I just like also the regularly having all of these people come here and all that stuff. But I mean, I'm just. What a place, though. I'm in a lot of pain, so I don't want to. Getting in and out of the car hurts a lot, and I don't want to keep doing that. So I'm trying to keep it down to a minimum, but it's also raining a little bit. But it's stunningly beautiful. I mean, the grass is perfect. You can see how much they cut and have to maintain it. It's on a scale, but then you also have the controversy of politics involved in all of this, and winners and losers, and who gets to rewrite history, and who, if you make more signs, and we're already dealing with this now with AI and going forward. And look at these AI history maps. Someone made a map for one of the school districts and like made up the names of states. Who verifies this? They said the War Department had to do it. I love how you said the War Department, because we went to the Defense Department. Now we're back to the War Department. And I almost feel like these foreign actors are trying to destabilize our country with trying to create this civil war and almost have both sides fighting against each other, even if it's not state on state or blue and blue or slavery versus non-slavery. It's the battle over whatever you want to pick your sides on. The blue people pick their sides and the red people pick their sides. But at the same time, I'm just saying that, like, I'm in an unbelievable amount of pain, and I have been my entire life. And nobody's solved it. Nobody can fix it. I've had mental issues my entire life. Nobody's fixed or solved that. Nobody can fix or solve that based on current technologies. So again, how do you argue about the right for an abortion when you can't even settle the right of humanity and pain and suffering of me? I'm dysgraphic, I'm autistic, I suffer from depression, ADD, PTSD, I wasn't able to talk for... I could barely do anything. You guys also don't understand what it's like. I mean, the pain is so bad. It's getting worse and worse and worse. I'm not saying I'm helping or making it any better, but that's part of the whole situation. My arm hurts. My entire left side of my body, guys, is toast. I cannot express to you how much pain I'm in right now. If I don't think about it, and I focus on the history, and I focus on the engineering, and I focus on the connections, my mind can get away from it. But when it stops and it slows down, it gets so bad. I basically took a 30-hour break. Almost a 30-hour complete break where I just had to lay down. And if you only knew the situation with the family and the honest truth. Alright, let's go to the next one. Having a big obelisk makes it easy to make level.
Yes, you've landed on one of the most important things about monuments that tends to disappear once they are finished. A monument is not a one-time expense. It is an infrastructure commitment. The Pennsylvania Memorial is almost a perfect case study. Pennsylvania created a 9-member commission of Civil War veterans and appropriated money to build it. It was dedicated in 1910. A War Department record later put its original cost at $150,000. It is 110 feet high, built largely from polished granite over an iron and concrete frame, topped by a 7,500-pound bronze-winged Victory. and its tablets contain the names of more than 34,400 Pennsylvania soldiers believed to have been at Gettysburg. That decision to list ordinary enlisted men as well as officers is one reason it feels so different from a heroic equestrian statue. And then the maintenance problem began almost immediately. There were construction and water infiltration problems. Pennsylvania spent roughly another $12,000 on repairs before the memorial was transferred to federal custody. In 1923, the Gettysburg superintendent actually argued that the War Department should accept it because it was finally in good condition and wouldn't cost very much to maintain. By April 1924, the War Department had taken responsibility for it. Then its iron interior rusted. Repairs followed in the 1930s, inspections and rehabilitation in the 1950s, and by 1985 officials were trying to raise another $100,000 for restoration. Pennsylvania proposed $50,000 with private donors supplying the balance. So your model is basically: state veterans conceive it, state appropriates money, architects, sculptors, foundries, quarries build it, it is erected on federal battlefield land, federal government accepts custody, generations of taxpayers, states, nonprofits, donors and preservation workers inherit the maintenance obligation. And yes, today Gettysburg National Military Park NPS is fundamentally responsible for preserving this commemorative landscape. That obligation goes all the way back to the 1895 law establishing the National Military Park, which specifically charged the federal government with the custody, preservation and care of monuments. The battlefield passed from the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association to the War Department in 1895, and administration passed to the National Park Service in 1933. But it isn't purely federal money. Gettysburg has a specific cooperative arrangement involving Pennsylvania that lets the park obtain funds for maintaining Pennsylvania monuments, and nonprofit partners have repeatedly supplied matching money. In one documented project, the Gettysburg Foundation and Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association contributed about $94,000 to match federal funds, giving NPS preservation specialists roughly $188,000 to work on hundreds of monuments. So the people you're watching from the car may indeed be part of that preservation system, although I can't confirm who employs that particular crew. What you're describing is completely consistent with NPS monument work: lifts, tanks, cleaning stone, repointing masonry, treating bronze and periodically rewaxing metal. Gettysburg has been doing versions of this for generations. There's even archival evidence of the Civilian Conservation Corps washing monuments in 1934. Modern conservation generally tries to be much less aggressive than some older cleaning methods, and the scale is enormous. Gettysburg has more than 1,300 monuments and commemorative features, about 400 of which are considered major sculptures. The Park Service itself acknowledges that staffing and funding constraints have reduced its capacity to maintain them, and explicitly notes that adding more monuments would further dilute the resources available to care for the existing collection. The whole park makes your infrastructure argument almost ridiculously concrete.
The scale
As
is
of FY 2024, NPS estimated Gettysburg National Military Park had about $92 million in deferred maintenance and repair needs, plus roughly $2.3 million every year in routine maintenance requirements. That's not just monuments. It includes roads, buildings, landscapes, utilities and everything else. But that's precisely your point. Preserving history means maintaining an enormous physical plant indefinitely, and your cannon observation is exactly right. An original 19th century cannon tube can survive while almost everything supporting it has to be recreated repeatedly. Wood rots, iron fasteners corrode, paint fails, wheels split. NPS even has a cannon carriage shop operation associated with Gettysburg's preservation program. That's essentially the ship of Theseus problem applied to a battlefield. The cannon may be original, the carriage isn't. The road follows an 1863 alignment but has modern pavement.